Hi, how's it going? How's it going? Just give it a few seconds for the stream to kick in, guys. You know the drill. Just give it a minute or two for a few people to log on. I'm just setting a few things up and I'll be right with you. Be right back. Yes, no. How's it going, guys? I am with you. Just bear with me a minute. Just waiting for a few people to log on. I'm a little bit later than advertised, I'm afraid. Got time to go grab yourself a drink before you sit and listen to what I've got to say on this. Had a bit of an emergency I had to run off for just. But I'm back now, so we're going to sit down and try and get this stream done so I can get this one more system packed away and ready for the events coming up in the season. I don't need to be sat in front of it to tell you that and remind you that it's Revival 2019, 6 weeks. So be sure to grab your tickets early. It will cost more on the door. So be sure to grab your tickets early from the links you see on the poster there on the screen. One more minute, guys, just getting my stuff together. Let me dogs out, doing whatever, and I'll be right back. 2 seconds. Hi, I can see a few of you logging on, bear with me. Dogs have got all they need now. Oh. Need anything out there? Right. Hey guys, who's here then? Let's have a look. I see Scott Brand, Andy Rea, Chris Brown, Chris Wilkins, Mr. Davis, is it indeed, Mr. Johnson. How's it going, guys? You alright? Glad you're joining us, and hi, how's it going, and welcome to another YamYam Retro Gaming live stream. I'm a bit later than I wanted to be, sorry guys. Everyone who knows me knows I'm crap with my timekeeping normally. I was actually on time for this, but a slight minor emergency meant I had to quickly run off out the house, so I've blasted out and come back, so I'm a bit short of breath, so do excuse me. But yeah, here's a video I've been meaning to do for a while now. I've been covering a lot in recent streams with regards to the Spectrum Next. I've also been covering some of my rare systems, and as you all know, I do like a good flash solution for consoles. And today we're going to be talking about one I know a lot of people have been waiting on, and it is this, which is the PSIO from Cyberdyne Systems. It is actually pronounced that, PSIO. I always call it PSIO because people tend to understand what that means more, and obviously you're pronouncing the P for PlayStation. It's a device that was created in 2016 once some hackers had finally got through the encryption and finally worked out how to force a PlayStation to execute code from a different source other than the disk drive. Now, in recent years, obviously, EverDrives have become prevalent. That was, of course, a bit easier to do for the cartridge-based systems because you can do everything on cart, you know. That's the best way in or out, so... Which is better, the PSIO or the PS Mini? I'll get to that in a sec, Chris. So, yeah, the PSIO itself, it was cracked a couple of years ago by a team in Australia, and they've been working to get this working as a flash solution for the PlayStation. Now, the problem we've had is, like I say, other CD systems in recent years have started to be cracked. You have to put a bit more work into it than you do with a cartridge-based system in order to get it to execute ROMs, because with a cartridge-based system, all it's doing is reading data from the cartridge slot. It's a little bit more simpler to execute code, and of course older systems tended to have slightly less encryption. It was all done in software. When it comes to CD-based systems, you've got more devices in the equation. Obviously, the main one you have to be concerned with when it comes to most of the 5th generation CD systems is you've got a BIOS to contend with, which obviously the earlier consoles didn't have, and then you've got a CD-based CD mechanism, as well as the actual the motherboard itself. So you're talking about a lot more things that have got to be kind of involved with the process and getting code to execute. And the PlayStation, for all it was like the most popular system, of that era, and definitely broke a lot of records, it's the one that's taken one of the longest to crack, probably because of how well it was built, how well it was researched. And not only that, but unlike a lot of 5th generation CD-based systems, even 4th generation ones, they tended to only have perhaps 1 or 2 hardware revisions. The PlayStation, as some may or may not be aware, has undergone a lot of revisions over the years. This was one of the first systems that was widespread chipped. I think about 50% of PlayStations that have passed through my hands over the years have had some kind of mod chip installed into them. There were plug-in solutions such as the Action Replay and other solutions that use the serial port in order to load copies. There was the disk swap method, which you could do on the 1st generation models, and then mod chips kind of took over that job as the models evolved. Not only are there like 3 different obvious models as far as exterior ports available goes, but inside the motherboards were very different between revisions and between regions. So there's been a lot to contend with creating a solution for this system. But thankfully Cyberdyne have done it, and about 2 years ago they output the first versions for this, the first hardware revision of this system, the PSIO. They put it out as like a test kind of pre-order thing. They only went out, I think, in 2017 in the end, and then finally last year they started taking pre-orders on a 2nd and a 3rd batch, and I think I was either in the 2nd or the 3rd batch. I pre-ordered mine for the 2nd or 3rd batch, and I pre-ordered it at the end of October, and it arrived in mid-February, right on time when they anticipated it would come. Yeah, exactly, Mike. Yeah, nice to see you on, by the way. Propping the disc tray open with a matchstick or a pen lid, or somebody would yam chewing gum or blue tack into the slot to push the button down. Yeah, and it killed a lot of PlayStations, unfortunately. Yeah, Chris, you're right, the PS2 had the most sales, but the PS1 was the first one to kind of break away from Sega and Nintendo's stronghold of the earlier generations and show us the way forward. So this system was pre-ordered, it came in February, but there are a couple of caveats for it. It's now a proper dedicated product. It's not just like a prototype like it was. It arrives in this box, which looks very close to the hardware boxes you would get for a lot of other PlayStation peripherals. So the memory cards would have come in a box actually very similar size to this. Things like your control pads, carry cases, I don't know what else. They would all come in boxes very similar to this, and it's very high quality box in that. In the box, you get for 150 Australian dollars, which equates pretty well at the current exchange rate. It equates to about 85 quid, I think it was, and then you pay your import duty when it arrives in the UK. So it equates, by the time it arrives on your doorstep, you've probably paid just shy of £100 to get it here, which is really good for a non-EverDrive based system. For a console that is, it's only just been cracked. Inside the box, you've got your plastic sleeve like that. You get the PSIO device itself. You get a little fold-away instruction booklet which tells you how to use the system and what you need to do. And you will also, which I can't show you because it's already been installed, you will get a little device called a switch mod. Now, that's one of the caveats with this device, in that even though it looks like it's a plug and play device, it's actually not. I'm going to quickly turn it off now and I'm going to talk you around the hardware. So this is a standard PlayStation, and if I just quickly flip it around, you'll see what we're dealing with. I'll unplug that for a moment. So this is a Series 1 Model 1 PlayStation, otherwise known as the audiophile version. And the reason it's called that is because you've got your standard power output over here. You've got a parallel port over here, which was originally meant for all kinds of expansions that never arrived. I believe originally it was kind of a leftover from the development days, because the development systems allowed direct connection to a PC through the parallel interface. And from what I understand from some of my coder friends, they actually made their own devices to execute code on here back in the day, which obviously they would not be allowed to release or use, or they were eventually blocked out within the hardware revisions. You've got a serial connection port here, which was used for the link cable. You've got the AV multi-out, which everyone will recognise was the same one they used pretty much on the PS2 with the block-like connection, and this was the only connection you found on later PlayStations. Let's try and plug that back in with my left hand, not having much luck. But the reason this is the audiophile model, you'll see there you've got the 3 ports in the middle and the smaller one there. It's got the extra RCA there because obviously this was the time when they were kind of pushing multimedia as being a thing for this generation of consoles, and they wanted it to have connectivity to other output devices. So you would have been able to output this to, directly to a sound system with the RCA jacks. And from what I understand, the sound output and the BIOS revision that's on these earlier models outputs much higher quality CD audio sound, better than the later revisions, and these are the ones that are highly sought after. The problem with these though, I'll go into that in just a sec. The later revisions did away with this to begin with, still had a parallel port, and then the Model 3s, they completely got rid of the parallel port, and the only connection you were left with on the back was the AV multi-out and the serial connection port. They did that to avoid things like using the Action Replay or other devices, understandably so, because at that point you could use those devices to play copies. This is actually a Model 1 of the Series 1, and I'll explain why that is. Inside the system itself, you've got, I need to oil that spring a bit. If you look at the CD mechanism is actually arranged at the back of the unit. Very soon into its pole life, they changed that, and you can see there's like a metal spindle in the middle. That metal spindle was changed for a plastic one in the later revision, and then because of heat generation affecting the laser, from everything from the Series 2 onwards, they moved this whole assembly over to the right hand side here, so the heat didn't affect it as much from the power supply. The good thing about these was this was one of the systems where you could do the famed disc swap method, and it's going to be hard to focus on here. There's a very small button at the back of the system there, which the lid actually presses on when you close it, and that's how the system knows it's closed. What you could do is you could wait for the initial white load up screen, use a proper disc, then quickly rip the disc out and swap it with a copy, and the copy protection would then be bypassed. That actually caused a problem with burning out disk drives prematurely. I know a million people who had to sit their PlayStation on weird angles to get it to read even original games after a while, and it did kill a lot of early PlayStations. I did it from the off. I had one of the very first ones to come out back in the day, and I killed mine, and one of my proudest moments was I managed to take it back one day before the 1 year warranty expired at whatever it was then. I think it was Future Zone back then. I took it back to Future Zone, and I managed to exchange it one day before the thingy expired. But then when I got my revision 2, it was one of the second model revision 2s, and it unfortunately wouldn't play copies that way, so I lost out in that respect. But at least I couldn't kill my system anymore. So yeah, so this is a Model 1. Now a lot of these have died. Anybody who owns a PlayStation knows not only are they super cheap now because of how many are out there, they are also dying at an exponential rate. the CD assemblies have failed on these at silly rates, and this is why it was essential that somebody finally came out with a flash solution. So it's not before time that these systems are actually now out. The good thing is that you can use them with any Model 1 or Model 2 PlayStation, which are the ones that are dying at the highest rate, unfortunately, because you need the serial port. It does mean, unfortunately, though, that a huge number of systems out there that are Model 3 and don't have the serial port at the back, you can't use this. There's no way to hardwire it into the boards or anything like that. So, and you can't use it with the PS1, which was the later, smaller revision console, because that didn't have a serial port or the connections for it either. So if you're going to get one of these, you will need to have a Model 1 or a Model 2, and you'll need to have the, it doesn't matter what series it is, as long as it's the Model 1 or the Model 2, it needs to have the serial port to use this. Now, the system itself is just a brick that goes on the back. It's about a couple of centimetres thick. It's got an LED light for activity on the side, the serial slot itself. I believe this sticker, I'm not quite sure what it covers on the bottom, I'm not going to take it off. And then you've got a USB-B type connection port on the side. That's for development and debugging. You can't currently do anything with that. And each of these systems carries its own serial number. Now, the reason for that is they are trying their best to avoid having these cloned by the Chinese. There's some code and data input into them already to make them slightly copy protected. And when you actually buy your system, they will have logged, I think, the serial number that goes with your system, and they will match to the hardware. And when you actually install what you need to install, you have to go onto the site to download the instructions for your model, and they log your serial number at that time. I know it's kind of Big Brother who's watching you and all that, and it's you got to argue the practicalities of copy protecting something that's designed to get around copy protection. But as far as preserving old systems go, I don't see any problem with that. And you can understand them wanting to protect their own interests and not have shitty products out there on the market. So I totally understand why they've done that, and you will need to obviously not abuse the system. They were limiting pre-orders, so you couldn't pre-order loads. They have got a number of authorised resellers, but thankfully, unlike the people who are producing systems for the Saturn and the Dreamcast and other systems, they are in full-scale production now. The wait time is decreasing, and they are mass producing them. So you're not going to be waiting stupid amounts of time to get your system done. Now, the reason it's a bit of a catch and why not everybody is going for it is because not only do you need the PSIO device, like I say, there's also a switch mod. Now, what the switch mod is, you can actually make one yourself. It's a tiny little circuit board, which is very much like a mod chip, and you have to wire it to certain points on your board. The only thing that switch does is trick your PlayStation into thinking that it is executing the CD drive, but it's executing it via the serial port. You can make one yourself. There's a schematic on the site to do that. They used to sell it as a separate piece, but they realised so many people needed it, they now package it with the device. I think the first run of the devices were like £200 or something, and everyone said it's too much, people won't pay it. They've now got it down to like, 85 quid, and that includes a switch device. That is an absolute bargain. Kind of mad when you consider that the PlayStation itself, like I say, you can buy a PlayStation on its own for 5 or 10 quid now. So, it is kind of mad when you consider that. But like I say, they're so cheap you can throw them away, but there's no reason to throw them away anymore. If you've got a dead CD drive, they're a pain in the arse to replace, not really worth it. But if it is dead and you do want to keep one, you want it in good cosmetic condition, if you've got a Model 1 or a Model 2, then you can get this device for your system and bring it back to life. The mod switch needs to be installed onto the motherboard before you can even use this system. When you've got the mod switch installed, if you haven't got this plugged in, it behaves just like any other system out there, right? And so you can put your discs in, you can do whatever with it. When you've got this in, the switch system activates and instructs the PlayStation to read from the serial port. So that's where it differs. Thankfully, this one is still an active system. So, and just to show you that nothing has changed, I've got my original copy of Resident Evil 2. I don't know where my Leon disc is, which is kind of pissing me off. I'm sure it will turn up. This has only got very minor surface scratches from cleaning. And thankfully, this Model 1 has actually got a fully working CD drive, which I'm very, very surprised about. Like I said, I've just talked about the failure rates. And if I fire that up now, you'll see, well, you should see, good old faithful PlayStation loading screen. Everybody loves that. And then it was always fingers crossed that that screen would come up and show that it's loading. Any PlayStations that are failing, you'll find it will either take ages to get to that screen, or it will stay on this screen and it will never pass it. It should kick in a minute and just roll over to the Capcom loading screen. Should. There we go. And there is the copyright screen. Like I say, this PlayStation's in good order. I'll let it go to the pre-video, and you should see that it doesn't stutter at all. There you go. So that works perfectly. And the same is true is if you've got this plugged in, you can still run that. Now the good thing is if you've got a mod chip installed system, the switch mod doesn't actually affect your mod chip. You can leave your mod chip in place. This isn't my original PlayStation, but this is a mod chip PlayStation I've somehow come across on my travels. I just so happen to have a few copies here, which I do own the originals of, I will just mention. No, I'm not going to get all preachy about the grey area of copying your games, but yeah, this one has been mod chipped, so if I close the lid on that, you'll see this loads it perfectly fine. It'll load it just like any other mod chip console does. And it shouldn't have any trouble reading this. There's no audible extra spinning up of the disc or anything like that. There you go, it rolls over pretty quick. Anybody who's got a Model 1, you'll know that gets slower and slower with time as the disc drives are starting to fail. This still reads them like it was day one, and I'm quite happy about that. So that even went off that screen quicker than my original Resident Evil did. And this should run okay, so I'm just going to quickly show you that. Okay. There we go. If you've never played Parappa the Rapper, by the way, I highly recommend you do. It is such a fun game. It's really weird, but it's a rhythm game, but it's quite quirky. For how childish it looks on face value, it's a very cool game. I bought this back in the day for my PlayStation. Absolutely love it. And you can see that's reading perfectly fine. That brings back some memories, man. So that's running perfectly fine. Where older PlayStations do start to have trouble though, is with, especially as I start to age and get on, is when you're dealing with scratched discs. Now obviously, I'm not proud of this and I've only recently discovered this, and this is a shame because I used to own 4 or 5 copies of Point Blank 2 for some reason, I don't know why. Now this disc, unfortunately, when I dug it out recently, if you can see this in the light, if you look where the lamp is shining on that directly, you see that? That is like a super deep patch kind of gouge in the disc. It's like a heavy scratch. Now the game still loads, thankfully, but if I put this in and load this up, you'll see why discs are always going to be a pain in the arse, especially as time's gone on. And if we let this get to the title screen, you'll see just how badly this scratch will obviously affect the game. It's taking a little bit longer to read. And then fingers crossed it will actually load. But when it goes to the opening video sequence, you should see where the problems come in. Can you hear that? Yeah, you can see it now. We've got major skipping going on because of the state of the disc. Now anybody who's got a failing laser or even slightly iffy discs, I mean, I've got a Tekken 3 here that's definitely seen better days as well. If you've got any discs like this or your laser's getting old, this is going to be your PlayStation experience, and that just completely kills it. You know, I love that game, but that would just do my head in. So this is where devices like the PSIO definitely improve things. I mean, I'm glad I've still got disc functionality there, but the PSIO renders all that irrelevant, and it renders it irrelevant because it reads just like a standard device. Just plug that into the back of the system there. You have to push with even force. It clicks on it. It is a little bit, you know, flexible at the top, so you have to be careful. If you were to knock that, you could quite easily knock it out or break it, so you do have to be careful. But it does fit in the slot nice and snugly. It's flush with the bottom of the system, so you know it fits quite nice on the back. And then you've just got your SD card slot on the top. It does take full-size SDs, and as you can see in this one, I've got a my memory adapter, and if you look, I've gone the whole hog here, and I've got, if it will focus, it may or may not, 256 gigabyte class, I'm not sure, class U3, class 10 U3. I don't understand the new class systems with SD cards, but this device at the moment is set up to read everything up to a 512 gigabyte SD card, which is pretty much the largest you can currently go. 1 terabyte cards are on the way. They will increase support over time. But as I've shocked a lot of people with recently when I've been doing my flash device videos, flash memory has got so much cheaper, and whereas, you know, not so long ago, your entry-level flash would have been 32 gigabyte for cheap, it shocked even some of my more aware friends to know that a 256 gigabyte, you can get a 256 gigabyte USB flash pen now for about 20 quid, and that people are shocked when they believe that, and they're like, well, it's not very high quality. Yes and no. I found that these cheap ones from this particular company, and I'm going to plug these guys now, this is mymemory.co.uk. I go here now for all of my flash memory. I've used these to find one of the few USB sticks, USB to SD adapter that works with the PlayStation Mini. I've found USB sticks compatible with some of the flash solutions I've tried to do for consoles where nothing else worked. My memory is great, and their own branded stuff, I believe, is similar to the Integral stuff, which generally doesn't work, but I found their stuff to be compatible with most things. The write speed when you're writing data to it, like from your PC, is a bit slower than the more premium stuff, but the read speed is full speed for the device that it should be. So when you're talking about flash solutions, once you've written the data to them and defragmented it using an SD sorter, you find that it runs perfectly well and it reads it at full speed, so you're not going to have any hang-ups. So I'm just going to pop this back in, make sure I get it in the right way. There we go. And it's got a push-in, push-in, push-out system. The good news is if you can't afford the bigger ones, or you don't want to prep a large card and pour your eggs in one basket, you can actually hot swap the SD card on this. As an instruction you can do on screen, and you can pop that out and change cards. So you could have, say, a full A to Z library over 5 or 6 cards. You could swap them out. Personally, I don't like to mess about. The whole point of having flash devices for me is to have everything in one place. So I've gone with the 256. It's the best value you can get before jumping up to silly prices. So, you know, like a 1 to 8 gigabyte SD was about, I think it was about 15, 20 quid. I think this was £28 for this, for a 256, but the 512 goes to like 80 quid. So right now, 256 is about the biggest you can go without going stupid. It's the kind of mid-level at the moment. So that's what I've gone for. And the 256GB has been big enough to fit on about 80 to 85% of the PAL PlayStation library. Now at the moment, there's only two formats that this system will recognise. It will recognise ISO and it will recognise bin format. Now the problem is in neither of those systems you can shrink down below their CD sizes. You do need to use for this clean dumps, nothing that's been modified, nothing that's been messed with, nothing where the Q files have been altered or the Red Book audio has been, you know, changed up or anything like that. It has to be that the ideal format to use is Q and bin files, and that's because some games that use CD audio, if you do ISO, you'll have no music in the game whatsoever. So bin and Q is the way to go. And I found out when I was doing this that I needed to build a new library from scratch. I've got loads of PlayStation ROMs lying about, but the PlayStation ROMs they've been hacked and changed and compressed for different reasons, for burning, for use in certain emulators or whatever. So I had to get a new set, a new clean dump. I had to get the good ROM. It's like the equivalent to the good ROM set. It's the redump set, and those dumps are one-to-one dumps, and they're pretty much perfect disk images. Once you've got those images, you then have to use at the moment a conversion system which converts the multi-Q files to one Q file, and then it converts it to a format called Q2, which is .cu2. It's similar to a Q file, but it's a file system. Apparently is more efficient for this. I'm hoping they will make it a little bit more drag and drop, because it did take a while to re-download all my ROMs and organise them and rename them and alter the Q files and filter out what I didn't want. But I did. I mean, I had to wait for the system, so I had time to do that. And what I decided to go with for my system, even though with all my other EverDrives I have multiple regions like Japan and America and you know, PAL, and then, you know, I have hacks and things like that. Because you're dealing with such large file sizes, you've got to be a bit more selective. Even if you break it down into libraries, like I say, this is a 256GB card, and I've got about 80 to 85% of the PAL library on here. Now, a couple of people have asked me, if I was only going to go with one file set, why did I choose the PAL set? Well, there's a perfectly good reason for that. One is, nostalgia is one. I own the PS1 from new. I fondly remember the games from new. At this point in the console generations, unlike the earlier systems, where they generally didn't optimise 60Hz games to run at 50Hz for like the PAL market, they used to just leave the code as was and let it execute slower. That's why you end up with games like Sonic, which seem massively slower on the PAL market. A lot of Mega Drive games, that was pretty much evident. A lot of SNES games were like that, and you suffered with horrendous screen compression from the borders at the top and the bottom. By the time it got to the PlayStation era, they tended to adjust the code so it would execute about the same speed as their NTSC counterparts. So that didn't matter too much to me. Also, it was at this point they started to release more drastic changes between regions. Now, I've got more of an affinity to the British region games than the others. The only reason I tended to bother out with NTSC games at all back in the day was because when you had copies and early access to games, they tended to be the American or Japanese versions. As far as playing the games go, though, I only want PAL. Thinking of examples, if you think of games like Gran Turismo, for example, with Gran Turismo, the British version of Gran Turismo 1 and 2, the British, American and Japanese versions were all drastically different. You had different car makers, you had different libraries of cards, you had completely different intros, you had completely different sound libraries and tracks. And of course, you want that as authentic as to what you remember as possible. So I wanted the British version of that. There were some British games that saw a little bit more censorship than others, but then again, there were other games where the American version would have seen more censorship. So for the sake of this device, this flash system and the way it works, I found it's much more effective to have the entire PAL library if I've had to make a choice, which I have, and I've put the entire PAL library on here. There are a couple of exceptions, and I'll show you what the problems are with that. The other thing is that the Cyberdyne actually recommend you stick with the ROMs for your region. It will play multi-region, so it will play ROMs from other systems, it will execute them just fine. However, unless you're using, depending on which model PlayStation you've got as well, unless you're using a proper RGB SCART cable, it will output the video in black and white. Through RCA, it won't process the signal I think it puts it out in a weird PAL 60 signal. And even, I've tried adjusting a few different TV sets now, and it doesn't matter what I do, the few NTSC ROMs I've tried output in black and white, and it ruins the quality and everything. So I would recommend sticking with PAL. If you've got an RGB SCART cable for your PlayStation, it should output in colour perfectly fine on an NTSC compatible TV. But of course, as people know, because I use my systems for events, you need to have a system that is compatible with more displays than, you know, a crystal clear display. And that's because, depending on what event it goes to, this could end up plugged into a projector. It could be into, you know, flat screen LCD as I've got here. It could be plugged into a CRT. And the connectivity, as far as connectivity goes, having standard RCA connections at the end is obviously what you need 9 times out of 10. So that's what I've stuck with, and that's why I've stuck with the PAL games. And okay, that means that I'm missing out on a few games which would have been nice to have had on here, such as the Resident Evil 2 DualShock Edition. We never got the DualShock Edition, so we never got the version that's got the cheat mode enabled for infinite ammo. We only ever got one version of Resident Evil 2. We did get a better director's cut than America, I think. But it means we never got a copy of Resident Evil 2 where you could use the analog controllers and the rumble feature was active. So, you know, it's kind of, it swings and roundabouts, and you've got to make your choice. All things considered, I strongly thought about it all, and I think that going with the PAL selection was the best thing to do. So I know I've talked a lot, guys, but I wanted to give you a thorough kind of going over of the considerations for this. It's very different to a lot of flash devices I've covered so far and what you may have seen. And so that's why I wanted to talk you through how this differs so much to the other ones. So now we're going to fire it up and we'll show you what we're dealing with. Now, it is a very well put together system, I'm going to say that. So we're going to fire this up, and you'll see that when it loads, there's a couple, you can change the boot configuration a few different ways. I've had it set up to bypass the original boot screen because it just makes loading that little bit faster, because every time it reloads, it has to reread the SD and reload the game library. So even though it doesn't take too long, if you've got the copyright screen in place from the original PlayStation, it just adds a few seconds too many to for my liking. So I've disabled it and just had the PSIO boot sequence. So when it loads, this is what you're presented with. By default, this screen is black. There's a couple of skins you can actually use to skin up your menu, so it doesn't look all plain and boring like an EverDrive menu. And even though text is enough, it is nice to have a kind of more graphical user interface, and that's what we're looking at here. So the skin I've gone for, and you can only get this as PAL. It's interesting to know that when you're using this in PAL format, it actually displays more lines of text on screen than it does with NTSC. So there's more games on screen at one time. So when you load it up, you're presented with a menu, and you've got this kind of nice Model 1 BIOS background. Anybody who had a Model 1 will recognise that. I much preferred that, and I preferred the graphic equaliser for CD mode on this version to the later versions with the blue screen background. So that's one up it's got on the PlayStation Mini straight away, because the PlayStation Mini, the whole environment is styled like the later PlayStations, and I had an affinity to the early PlayStations where it was all grey, you know. So yeah, so that's what we got. So browsing down, we've got, you can see I've put on as much as is possible, I do need to resort slightly because some things are out of order. It will only sort. It tries to sort alphanumerically. However, it also goes with certain symbol conventions. So depending on how you name them, with some systems I would have named that Actua Golf 1. I didn't want to do that, but you do run the risk then that some will be bumped off elsewhere in the list. And there is actually a limit on characters. I think the maximum character limit you can have for a title, I think, is 60 characters. And even though you can only see so much on here, when it's on your computer, there may be extra sections such as J or NTSC or whatever. So you have to stick within those conventions, else you can't load them on here. So all things considered, I've done it and I've used the system. I've used SD sorter, I think it is, which basically sorts files out alphanumerically while it's still on your PC. It's also a bit like defragmenting your SD card. I'd recommend, if you're going to use a big card like this, that you do that, because the PSIO will read it a lot faster, and so will your PC, and it'll stop things getting corrupted because it won't be jumping about all over it to look for the right file. So yeah, this is all sorted like that. Now, as far as the library goes, I mentioned I've got about 80 to 85% on here. What I've done is I've put on all key PAL titles. Anything that didn't interest me too much, I've left off. So there will be a few games that aren't on here, probably because they were like 3 or 4 disc affairs and I don't care for the game much. Or in the case of sports games, if I scroll down the list here, if I go to one of the categories you know would usually be full, you can see I've got FIFA 96, 97, 98, 99, and then it goes 2000, 2004, 2005. That was the point I realised having every FIFA on would be pointless. Sports games tend to be the same, and those are the ones most guilty of having a yearly release where not much changed. The reason I've selected these ones is because these were the early days of the PlayStation, so it made most sense, because obviously this was the point where, you know, FIFA first went to 3D. And obviously because the later ones show you how much it evolved in that time before the PlayStation 2 had well and truly taken over. So, I mean, I was surprised to learn that they got released as late as 2005 for the PS1, but there you go. So, you can see there why I've left certain games out. There might be some shovelware on here, like Family Games Compendium, but I'm trying to keep as much a range as possible. So, yeah, but I mean, all the main games are here, like Final Fantasy Origins and Final Fantasy Collection, I think we're on here. I've just broken those down into individual discs because I felt it was more appropriate for browsing the list, if you know what I mean. And it handles multi-disc games perfectly well. So we'll see what it's like here. So we'll jump into Final Doom. So you pick your game that you want, and then you can see there's a number of things at the bottom of the screen you can do here. You can press square, which will call up the search function. So you can type in the name of a game and search for it. Not really essential, because up and down or using the L2 and R2 buttons scrolls up and down the system really fast anyway. You can also use the analog sticks to browse this, which is quite good as well. So yeah, you can search. You can, if you press circle, you can opt to load from a CD. So if you've got a CD in the CD drive, you don't need to unplug your PSIO and you can just launch it from there. From what I understand, at some point, I think they're hoping to make it so you can rip your games directly to your PSIO. Hopefully they'll include that in future firmware updates and it will format it all correctly and everything. So that would be quite cool if they eventually do that. But no, we don't want to launch that. And then if I press triangle, we've also got a few options. Now the options we've got here, you can see there we can switch between PAL or NTSC. I think those are the only two options. I've kept it in PAL for the sake of this because, like I say, that's how I will use it most of the time. Sound effects, you turn that on or off. That's just the clicking sound you hear when you navigate the menu. The PlayStation logo pop up. That when I launch the game in a minute, you'll see there's a little loading logo that comes up. Now, I don't really remember these. I believe they came a bit later in the PlayStation's life cycle and were used on some games. And there's a few different options there. There's off, the 94 splash, or the Japanese. I like the Japanese one because I believe it was used on some Japanese adverts. There's a little PlayStation logo, and a bit like the Sega advert, it goes PlayStation, and it just sounds pretty cool when you load the game. So I've left that on. There is a background music. That's the default background music, but I don't really like browsing music, if I'm honest. You can actually drop your own background music onto the card and have that play in the background if you want, which could be quite cool. In the future, they will allow you to play game music, and they will allow you to put playlists on there to play those. I think they're also hoping to incorporate the graphic equalizer into this as well. So that would be quite cool. But I turned it off because I just find it slightly annoying. You've got a burn-in timer which will fade the screen out over time. You can change the selection bar colour through a few different colours. I think grey is the default, but it doesn't contrast very well with the white. Blue just didn't seem appropriate. I went with red because it's the revival colour and it's the highest contrast I could see on most screens. Japanese navigation will switch. You'll see those two symbols switch round. That just switches it so select is circle and back is X. And obviously you don't want that unless you're used to using Japanese stuff. Show file sizes there's no need for. The EXTDSP mode. Now this is to do with the actual game loading. From what I understand, you're supposed to leave it on this K1v3 by default because that will load most games. I haven't really found one that doesn't load, to be honest, by changing that. That doesn't load with that default setting. So, but apparently there's one or two games where you may need to change that for Kiv 1, Kiv 2, or turn it off completely. So you've got the option there. The license, you can actually change the loading BIOS screen to be Sony of America, Sony of Europe, or Sony of Japan, or leave it on auto. It's nice if you want to just see the different, the different areas come up. However, some games, because you're using original hardware, will do a check for a certain hook on the ROM image, and if it's wrong for the region, it won't load the game. So you're best off just leaving that to auto by default. So enable fast boot. That was what I was talking about skipping the load up sequence. I've skipped the initial white BIOS screen because it just slows the system down from loading, but you can re-enable it. Dual shock vibration. As I browse this list, as I hit certain commands, it will give a little judder in my hand. I've left that on because at least it means I'm getting some kind of tactile feedback to see if it's working. Enable wallpaper. If I kill that, you can see the system switches there back to the black screen. So that's what it looks like by default, which is nice and neat and everything. But I think it's nice to add a little bit of character, and so I've enabled that wallpaper on there. They will make it soon, so you can actually put several wallpapers on at once and swap them on the fly. At the moment, you can only put one kind of wallpaper on there. Change username. That will change the name of what the system calls you, although it very rarely actually addresses you that way, but I've set it to Revival Retro Events because that's how it's going to be used for the most part. And then you've got things like system diagnostics. You can't use that yet. That will be incorporated for doing firmware updates in the future, but it's not enabled yet. System information does tell you what version PlayStation you've got, and you can see there that this has the version 2.2 PlayStation BIOS and what version firmware is actually on the PSIO at the moment. So there you go. A bit of legal information, the usual bump, so you know what's what. And the good thing is when you change your settings, if you hit save there, it will save it directly to the PSIO device, and it will remember that even if you switch SD cards. So going back to the games anyway, if we want to load a game, we just browse to it and off we go basically. Hit X, it searches and preloads the ROM image. You can actually download an entire library of small images to call up as like box art, or you could do screenshots, but the resolution's quite low, so going with the box art tends to be the best thing to do. You can download those straight from the PSIO website, but there's a few that are missing or really low quality. So what I've done is I've gone in and kind of manually added my own for a couple of games. So, but this is the default one for this. And if we just hit go back, you'll see when you hit it, presented with this, then you just hit X and off we go. And there's a little Japanese splash screen. And it goes straight onto the copyright screen and into the game. Now anybody who's played these regularly will know that sometimes these little FMV sequences can lag, sometimes the sound can lag, and the seek time on the disc always delay things slightly. And what I'll do in a minute is I'll do a direct comparison between an original disc and the PSIO, so you can see what the difference is. On some games it could be quite noticeable. This is Final Doom. This came after the original release of Doom, which was actually Doom and Doom 2 combined. And of course the PlayStation port of Doom, one of the best console, probably the best console port you can get. So, and off we go, yeah. Oh man, this takes me back. Of course, the good thing about this, you actually had decent strafing controls. One thing it didn't have, unfortunately, was the one thing it didn't have, unfortunately, was analog stick support. That would have made it just about perfect, but there we go. Kind of everything. I'm controlling this badly at the moment because I'm holding the control pad, but that's working absolutely perfectly anyway, so we'll just reset that. We'll take a look at another couple of games. We'll look at some multi-disc loading. It does handle multi-disc loading just like the PlayStation did. So, now I don't have any save games on here. The one thing this doesn't do at the moment, unlike using like HD load for the PS2, the PSIO doesn't yet emulate a memory card. I don't know if they're going to work that in. I believe they're going to try, but at the moment you still need a memory card to save your games. So don't throw away those PS1 memory cards just yet. I need to dig mine back out. I've still got mine with saves on from back in the day. But yeah, whereas the PS2 hard drive loading, you can actually save your game directly to the hard drive. As yet, you can't save your games directly onto the SD card. So hopefully they'll work that in the future, but they haven't figured that out yet. So you still need a PlayStation 1 memory card. But yeah, any games that use multiple discs, this also supports. So if I go down to the obvious, which will be Final Fantasy, if I hit X here, you'll see it loads the preview, and then if I go to details, you'll see there's an extra option come up at the bottom which says M-Disc, which is multi-disc. This is also why you need the tool, because it needs to set up these multi-disc .list files when you create it. And you can see there you can manually select a disc to load. Now, you can manually select the disc to load from the off. If it's a game that allows you to boot from that disc from the off, it will boot that way. If not, it will tell you to insert disc 1. Now, I believe when you start one of these games, when you get to the point that you have to change a disc, because obviously you can't return to that menu, the way they've done it is when you get to the point in the disc, which I believe would be when Ares dies on this, when you're asked to change disc, what you literally do is you tap the SD card to pop it in, pop it out, and then pop it back in again. And what it will automatically do is that multi-disc.list file will find the next numbered disc for the game set you've launched the original disc for, and it will automatically then load the next disc. So that's really cool, really, that it will automatically switch discs for you. If I turn this to the side, you can see when the thing actually reads discs by the LED that's mounted on the side there. So if I start my game, it should read the disc. There you go, you can see the yellow light flashing. So you have got a tactile feedback showing if it's actually working or not. And I'll load this up just to show you that the FMV and everything process is pretty quick. Now, I owned this game back in the day, and I remember that even when my game was brand new, there was still quite a lot of lag when viewing this. And even when I've seen on some emulators, there's still a little bit of lag on this FMV sequence. With the PSIO, because it's taking the that instruction cycle as fast as it can possibly be, and it's doing it with original hardware, you're getting the absolute smoothest FMV that the PlayStation can produce. You know, it should pan down in a second, I think, and show Midgar, if I remember right. You know, it's actually been a while since I've played Final Fantasy VII through. I think I may have to revisit it. But yeah, no lag. No sound desynchronization problems. No disc skipping. And of course, a perfectly silent PlayStation all this time. Not generating too much heat or anything. I'm really not excited for the new remake because they're going to spoil it. They should just leave things as they are. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, you know what I mean? This game was perfect as it was. Should just leave it alone. We talk about things aging badly. When you play this on real hardware, it doesn't feel like it's aged a day. I remember staying up all night to play this game when it first came out. I put so many hours into it. This music always reminds me of the chase music on Terminator 1. If you remember when they're being chased by the Terminator on the motorway. Always reminds me of that. Love this game, man. No lagging loading, no problems. Of course, you can't do some of the tricks that you used to be able to do, such as when you cast regen and you could open the disc slot and it would carry on doing. I don't think you could pull that off using this device, but yeah, it's working the way games intended to be used. Absolutely perfect, and it's so cool to see some original hardware running exactly the way it should. A game so heavy in FMV. So yeah, that is Final Fantasy VII using a multi-disc game. Now, a lot of people have asked, and this is probably going to be the last thing I touch on for this, is why would I pick this over the PlayStation Mini? I know you asked this, Chris, if you're still watching. Now, the PlayStation Mini, I actually praised up. I think it's a great little piece of kit, and I do like it. And once you actually mod it and, you know, you use the better emulator version, a lot of the games run a bit smoother. It's a lot more compatible. It will run a lot more games on there. However, it's still kind of clunky and it's not optimised as well as it should. Not only that, but I noticed that even with the modified RetroArch, the branch of it, PCSX for RetroArch, some of the games still lagged quite horribly, especially on FMV, and a lot of racing games lagged absolutely terribly. And of course, some of the best games available for PlayStation were racing games, and of course the flagship game, Ridge Racer. Now, unfortunately, on the PlayStation Mini, this ran quite terribly. It would, in the higher draw areas, it would lag quite badly. And if you put a stopwatch next to the timer that's on screen, you realise how much the game lagged, and so you don't really want to be trying to play these games on the PlayStation Mini. You need the original hardware, and you need to not fail. Ah, it's a shame. Thought I'd do it first time. But yeah, doing this with bin and Q files, we've got Ridge Racer, and in a second when it kicks in, we've got full music. And we'll set it to the default track, of course. Now, like I say, this on the PlayStation Mini, this lagged like absolute shit. On here, it runs full speed, without any lag, without any problems. And at the end of the day, if you're playing Ridge Racer, you don't want to be suffering from none of those problems. Oh, here we go.
3, 2, 1, go!
Everyone knows I love Ridge Racer. I really do miss my Ridge Racer, but I'm glad it found a good home at Arcade Club. But there's plenty of ways to play Ridge Racer these days, nearly as big as the arcade. My upright arcade is going to be coming back soon, hopefully, so looking forward to that. And we've got full audio. If I'd done this game in ISO format, I wouldn't have the full audio now. Because obviously this was one of the games that used CD audio. And if you remember, if you used this back in the day, you could open the disc tray and put in any kind of audio CD, and it will play the audio for that. You play the music while you're running around the track. Messed that up. I'm not used to the physics of the arcade car now. I've picked the Roku, and that's like got the best handling, so it doesn't slide as easily. I need to get some more practicing actually. Set some more lap time records at Arcade Club. But yeah, Ridge Racer, this was one of the games obviously that showed people the future. You know, the PlayStation was that first system that really showed you what next generation was. You know, the Saturn came before it, okay, but at this point everyone saw what the PlayStation could do from the demos and knew this was going to be the system to own. And a great many more people did than any other system before. I'd say PlayStation is when consoles entered. It was no longer kids' territory, it entered the mainstream, you know. And anybody who's watching that back, if you look at my lap time there and time that on the video, you should see it's perfectly in sync. There's no slowdown there. It's running exactly as it should do. That was a perfect corner. All the fading effects of the background are there. There's no major graphics artifact in anything more than the basic draw distance issues. Looks perfect. So, and while we're on the subject, I'm just going to knock this off a second. The PlayStation Mini, I was talking about some games being slow. Ridge Racer Revolution still had major graphics artifacts on the PlayStation Mini. I did manage to get a version fully working, but the audio kind of went out of sync. And when you went around areas such as the underpass, it would lag quite badly. Ridge Racer, because that's got much higher quality textures and everything, it ran like absolute shit on the PlayStation Mini. It ran so slow. It was easier to play that way, but it ran at about half speed. And when it jumps between fast speed and slow speed, it really throws you off your game and you can't enjoy it. And one of the biggest disappointments is that you had Ridge Racer Type 4 on there by default. And everybody said that was one of the games where they noticed its shortcomings. Now, one thing I really was disappointed in is that one of my favourite games on here didn't run at all on the PlayStation Mini. It ran, but because it used a lot of tricks, this didn't run, and that is Ridge Racer High Spec Demo. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with this was actually created. In fact, I'll load the game and just show you exactly what we're dealing with here. This was created and it was given free when you bought Ridge Racer Type 4, the PAL version, I think, and the American version. It was given out when Ridge Racer Type 4 was come out to show people how far PlayStation had come and how far the development teams had gone in the development of games, because when they did the first Ridge Racer, they were working to certain limits, new hardware, new territory and everything, and so it could only be so good. So what they did is by the time Ridge Racer Type 4 came out, and they were able to put in higher res textures and everything like that, they went back and they were testing and seeing what they could actually do. And what they did was they brought out this is Ridge Racer High Spec. And if you read back through the information here, what it basically tells you is that they actually found a way to make PlayStation run Ridge Racer at like 50 frames per second. Or 60 frames per second in the case of the NTSC version, which puts it on par with the arcade. Now, it meant that there had to be a few less cars. It also meant that some textures had to be downgraded, but they felt like it was wasted, wasted technology. And it was how they knew they could get a high texture game like Ridge Racer Type 4 running at 30 frames per second. But they tested it originally by developing this. So rather than let it go to waste, they released it as a free thing to go with Ridge Racer Type 4, and they released this what's called Turbo Mode. And what it is, it's the original game, but in 60 frames a second. Now, it's slightly limited from the original. You've only got a couple of cars to choose from. I think if I'd have done the thing at the start, I'd have had all the cars, but you haven't got all the game modes, and every mode is time trial, so there's just you and one other car on the track rather than a full rack of cars. But you've got all 4 tracks, still got the choice of cars. There's less tracks available, and I'll go with Grip because I do like that track. And when you load this up, they used a few hardware tricks to get full 60 frames per second, which makes it much closer to the arcade version. And this just runs brilliantly. Now, unfortunately, this game would run like absolute shit on the PlayStation Mini because it used like non-conventional processing to draw the graphics and to run it at 60 frames per second. The emulators developed for that system and the demands on a graphics processor are a lot higher than normal. And it's the kind of thing, I mean, I've tried running Ridge Racer High Spec on PC and it runs like crap on a lot of PC emulators as well. The only way to play this properly is on original hardware. So at least now with the PSIO and the PlayStation, you don't need the original disc, because it's getting a bit harder to come by now. But you can run this game the way it was meant to be played at near arcade quality. And it runs absolutely perfectly. No audio sync issues, no graphics faults. Full speed, 60 frames per second Ridge Racer on PS1. I'm doing quite badly, but I've just said 60 frames per second. The PAL version actually runs at 50 frames per second, obviously because it's 50 Hz, but you know, it's running at full arcade speed for all intents and purposes. And for those of you who love the arcade version like me, this feels a lot more familiar. I'll see if I can beat this douchebag now. Don't really like playing the controller anymore without analog control, but I'm confident I can beat him. It's so awesome in the arcade when you hear that line and you know you've done a perfect corner or a perfect overtake. A lot harder to do with steering wheel, obviously. Screwed that up badly. Come on, put it back. Oh, geared right down. It's gonna overtake me. Damn it. Oh, I'm getting the zone now. Oh, forget it. I've hit too many walls now. But anyway, that's another reason why the PSIO and a PlayStation pisses on the PlayStation Mini. If this had been out a bit sooner, I think the PlayStation Mini would have been completely obliterated. They even address the PlayStation Mini in the FAQ on the PSIO website, which basically says, you know, this is the real deal. You know, the PlayStation Mini is great, but it's got shortcomings. This is what you should be doing if you want to play PlayStation with a flash solution. So I'll just quickly show you one or two more games just to show you where there are still a few improvement areas. Now, the good thing is, because you're running ROMs, obviously, or ISOs, or bin&q files, disk images, there's a few things, obviously, you can do to over and above a standard PlayStation. One of those things is to run hacks. And obviously, something we've demoed at events before is the awesome Resident Evil 1.5. Now, for people who don't know, everybody knows at this point, Resident Evil 1.5 is the kind of patched together, cobbled together remnants of what was originally going to be Resident Evil 2. Now, we've run this on copied discs at events in the past, because some people never really got to experience it. You can play it on emulators on the PC and that. But to play it, you know, disc perfect on original hardware like this, without the problems of dealing with a disc, is superb, and it does run these games perfectly, thankfully. However, there is one drawback, and that is that these games are built on the original RIP, which of course was NTSC. Now, as you can see, anybody who used to play copy disc back in the day, this is what you would have been faced with. It shakes on this TV, but you would have been faced with a black and white screen because it's trying to do 60 hertz in the correct colours and everything, and it's just not working. Now, this is where if you had an RGB SCART cable, in theory it would put this out in full colour and display correctly. I haven't got one handy here, and I rarely will at events, and so getting this to display correctly isn't working. I thought I'd actually patched this ISO to run on PAL, but I don't think I did the patch correctly. I am going to try and patch this again for PAL and see if I can get that to run correctly on here without needing to, you know, use an RGB SCART cable, because I know I've run PlayStation, so I run this on the PlayStation before at events using the Stanley cable. So I'll just have to go back through. But what this is actually the very latest build of the game. They're still working on recovering screens from the game, recovering enemies, recovering weapons. So once they do that, it becomes more complete. I'm going to have to patch it every time, and obviously patch it for PAL every time in order to work properly on here with standard RCA outputs. But I will do that anyway. So, because anybody who's not played it, I recommend you get a hold of the game if you can. Get a hold of the latest patches with all the latest updates on there, and give original Resident Evil 2 a whirl to see exactly what you are missing. I think I even need this room. Yes, I can. I think I've got my controls set up wrong. Yes, I have. But yeah, anyway, I've had problems running that, obviously, because I haven't got an RGB SCART cable. And the other one I've had problems with is Thrill Kill. Now, Thrill Kill, I love to play. It's a really good game. You know, it's, for all intents and purposes, it was complete and never released. That too, there's several different builds of that floating around, and I thought I'd downloaded the full PAL version. The version I've got here isn't full PAL. It's like a PAL patched version, so it runs as PAL 60, and this doesn't really display those funny kind of PAL 60 games properly, and it also crashes when it tries to load a game. So yeah, there are a few hacks where it's not running correctly. Again, I think that's partly due to the fact that obviously it expects clean dumps when it comes to original games that it's trying to run. So when you're trying to run hacks where they're using all kinds of trickery to make it run, there's a chance they may not run. But like I say, Resident Evil 1.5 runs fine, so there's no reason Thrill Kill wouldn't run fine. I just need to get the correct version of the ISO to do that, and I'll be doing that very soon. So anyway, guys, that is the PSIO. I think it's an excellent piece of kit. Now, if you are thinking of getting one, and I'd recommend you do if you love PlayStation, and everybody loves PlayStation, I recommend you order one, get it directly from Cyberdyne themselves. Don't go through the third parties because they'll probably charge you more. You don't need to send your PlayStation off to Australia to be modded. They do offer a mod service, and everyone was concerned about that. You will need the Switch mod installed in order to run this, but you won't need to disable your mod chip if you've got one on there. You can still use your disk drive, so it's just a matter of soldering on this mod chip. Now, I got mine done through my repairman and Revival's repairman Jason at RG's Attic. So if you have a search on Facebook for RG's Attic, look through any of my posts. I praise Jason for the work he's done. He's worked on some rare consoles, and he's flew in the dark with a lot of things. But installing things like mod chips or doing AV mods is second nature. He installed mine without any problems. He got the card up and running. I'd forgotten to put a few files on there, and I had mine up and running within a couple of hours. So I'd say have a chat with Jason at RG's Attic, and he will be able to do the modification for you. I believe he's doing it as a mod service at the moment. I think for £30, could even be £25. And he will while he's got your PlayStation open, he will check all solder points. He'll re-grease the CD mechanism rails, and he'll make sure there's no blown capacitors or anything going on inside that's going to spoil your PlayStation. So yeah, if you do order one, give RG's Attic a shout. I'll put the links in the comments after this if you want to do it. And hopefully soon we'll have a new batch of revived PlayStations doing the rounds, rather than just letting them all get consigned to the scrap heap once that laser dies. So, hope you enjoyed the video anyway, guys. I've got more videos coming up soon. But again, another plug, Revival Gaming Legends 2019. Just 6 weeks away now. Get yourself there. There's going to be loads of arcades, loads of special guests you'll be able to get some one-to-one with. You're going to see systems like this there running a multitude of games, so you're not going to be short of things to pick from. There's going to be pinball, there's going to be loads of competitions, there's going to be all kinds of cool stuff there. Loads of rare consoles. It really is the UK's biggest and best dedicated retro gaming event. I'll be back in a video soon. I'll see you at the event, so take it easy and I'll see you soon.